Hello, my name, like you said, is Cindy Falk. I am the president of the Urban League, and our vice president is Debbie Tripp, and she's also a master gardener. So, if you come, we have several of our members that are master gardeners. A multifunctional herb garden is one where your herbs perform a function other than basic nutrition. Herbs are wonderful things. They are multitaskers. And before we get started, though, I'm going to read the disclaimer because when I get going, sometimes it's hard to slow me down. And our disclaimer is that these statements that I'm about to make are not for informational purposes only. They've not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. They are not intended to treat, cure, diagnose any disease. We are not responsible for any misadventures that should occur should you decide to implement usage of information in any way, shape, or form, or to self-medicate. Using herbs and essential oils may be dangerous, even fatal. Everyone is different. Always consult a healthcare professional before putting anything on, in, near, or around your person. This is especially true if you are pregnant, nursing, or could become pregnant, if you have a medical condition, on medication, or mentally or physically impaired, or just plain stupid. Because we all know those folks, right? Yeah. And in the hot coffee, and then they get burned, and then how'd that happen? Multifunctional foods, like I said, multifunctional herbs are those that have benefits, outside traditional nutrition. Functional herbs have benefits that are both culinary. They have a beautification. And they have usually concentrations of constituents that perform specific bodily functions. I want to make sure I get that right. For instance, they are, you have to be careful when you're walking around that one. They are good for your heart health. So I have herbs like onion and garlic. Those are known to perform benefits for the heart. You need to put that up a little bit. Yeah, hello. They perform benefits for the heart. They have anti-fungal, antiviral qualities, so they're good for colds, they're good for flu. Once upon a time, your great-grandparents would take an onion and cut it and either put it in your sock or they'd put it on the bedside to draw the disease away from you and into that onion. And I kid you not, that onion would look pretty funky, you know. It would get blackened and all that, but these are old folk medicines. Most of the herbs that we use today that we think of as medicinal herbs or even culinary herbs, at one point in time in history were grown in what was called a kitchen garden. And your kitchen garden had both your medicinal and they had your culinary, but people back then had a lot better knowledge of herbs and of their uses. So you could grow comfrey right next to digitalis, and people knew the difference. They knew, well, I can, grab this and not that. Today, I suggest if you're going to do herbs that are mostly medicinal, that you keep them separate, in a separate spot, in a separate corner, because you may know what it is, but someone that has access to your garden may not. Whenever you are deciding as what kind of things that you want to put in your garden, you have to think about things like, what kind of functions do I want this performed? Do I have certain health needs that I want these herbs and to support? Maybe I have trouble with my blood sugar, maybe I've got diabetes. Do I want to focus on me and my issues, or do I want something that is just general usage? Because we all have occasional problems. We might have colds, we might have flu. So do you want your herb garden to be primarily a occasional use? You might, and the reason I'm flopping is my, I have like zero sleep. So, you might find that it is more beneficial for you to have your herb garden be a culinary garden, because if you cook a lot, if that's what you normally use your herbs for, then you want to try to grow herbs that are both culinary use and medicinal use. Things like lavender, like chamomile lavender. And then the other thing that you're going to have to think about is, where am I putting this in my garden? Do I have the right conditions? Because let's take chamomile for instance. You may have the right conditions for Roman chamomile, which take a little more sun, but German, not so much. So you want to make sure that you put your cultivars where they need to be. And just because you're reading something online, or you looked it up in the book and it says, oh, it likes wet conditions or it likes dry conditions, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's appropriate for your area. Look and see where the author is living, because their conditions may work for them. But in general, herbs tend to like pretty poopy soil. You know, they like it kind of loose. It doesn't have to have a whole lot of nutrition in the soil. They're pretty laid back plants. And some of the herbs that you'll find that are the best ones to grow are those that are naturally around. So if you can find a local dealer, she'll have cultivars. She's not going to sell you something that isn't going to grow, or she'll be out of business pretty quick. So you look for those local cultivars. You're also going to look at what grows naturally around your area, especially if you want your garden to be more of a drought-tolerant garden. You're going to look into plants like lavender, dill, fennel, things that like a lot of sun. Mullein is a really great plant to stick outside, because mullein, if you look in pastures, you'll see those great big old tall plants that are growing. They have the really wide leaves and these little yellow flowers on them. They do. They look like a giant lamb's ear. Sometimes people, when they're small, will mistake the two. But you put it up against your skin and you'll figure out the difference. Mullein's a lot itchier than lamb's ear, which is soft. Now, lamb's ear is really good for drawing out impurities. It's kind of like God's Band-Aid, you know. You stick it on a wound and the things don't stick to it, the gunk, and it won't stick, but it does have medicinal healing qualities. And it'll stay soft for a good long time. During the Civil War, when you couldn't get a hold in the South, you couldn't get a hold of bandages, that's what they used. They would use large lamb's ear as bandaging out in the field, and kind of like as a washcloth, because if you feel it, it's got a large nap, a nice soft nap. Where your mullein, it's a much hairier little nap. So if you're using mullein, it's really great for the first year growth. Is really good for any kind of respiratory problem. A lot of smokers will use mullein. If you've got a chest cold, if you've got mucus that you want to break up, mullein is really great. You can have mullein tea. Old time they used to smoke it. My aunt grew up smoking mullein, and she's 90-something, and she's still going today, you know. So it's a really great, but that's your first year growth. Your second year growth, when mullein comes up, is when it gets those little bitty yellow flowers on it. And those guys are excellent pain relievers. Native Americans used to use it to relieve toothaches. And it's wonderful, wonderful on sciatica, on your sharp stabbing pains, the radiating pains. Mullein is an excellent choice to put in your salves and your tinctures. So it's a multi-purpose flower. Lavender that we were talking about, it takes a lot of sun, and it's got a lot of great culinary uses. There's a type of lavender, and we have a picture of it up here on our board. It's called Spanish Auto Cloth, and it's got a lot of the fragrance, and they usually use it a lot for their essential oils, kind of in a blend, but it's not that good on culinary use. So you kind of have to think, what I want to do. But traditional Provence flavor, great in culinary things, especially in your herbs of Provence. It's one of those main staples. If you're making teas, it's really good. And lavender, if you put the word anti in front of lavender, you're going to have anti-inflammatory, it's antiviral, it is anti-inflammatory, antiviral. It's really great on colds. It's great for your skin. So if you have little cuts, bruises, wonderful for that. We usually use that in a lot of our salves. Once you've decided what you want your garden to do you want it to attract pollinators? Do you want to use it in your kitchen? Do you want to use it just for medicinal purposes? Then that's when you start searching, okay, now what am I going to put in there? And there's really two easy ways to search. You can start by looking at the functions that you want to perform. So you'll either type in or search herbs that are good for heart health, herbs that are good for high blood pressure, herbs that are good for stress. And when you type that in, you're going to see a whole list. Usually for stress, you'll see things like, again, lavender, chamomile, passion flower. And passion flower is a wonderful thing to grow in this area because it grows wild. And you can go out in the field and find some really huge, that's what I call it a maypop, find some really huge fruits. And instead of the little bitty tiny ones that you normally see, I've been out to fields and found some really nice species, and you can make jellies. But they're really good for if you're trying to get over, if there's some kind of addiction that you have, like cigarettes, and you get the jitters or coffee, or even drugs. Those are a really good thing that helps people ease over the DT. Passion flower, chamomile, lavender. Valerian is another one. They're called nervines. They're called for your nerves. They're anti-spasmodic. So when people are trying to get through tough times, those are really great plants to use. Valerian, some people have used a little bit of that in their bath water, and it helps with the fibromyalgia. And so that's a nice little plant to keep a hold of, and you can make a tough tea out of it. Really great to keep in your garden. People used to keep that in there all the time. If you know what plant that you want, but you're not really sure of what it's good for, then you just do the reverse. You enter uses for lavender or uses for horse mint. But then you'll find, okay, this is good, then you'll know what conditions it is. If you want to, you might have, you might know the function, you might know the area that you have it in, and then that's the way you'll search. You'll say, drought-tolerant herbs for chickweed. I mean, not chickweed, but for chiggers. You might, because if you have a lot of insects in your garden. And some things like mint, they prevent certain pests. A lot of pests just don't like the smell of mint. And you plant that, and ants don't really care for it. That's my 15-minute book. Ants don't really care for it. Mice don't care for mint. Mint is one of those that it likes a little bit of shade, it doesn't like to necessarily at least hair grow because it gets too hot. So once you've identified what you want your garden to function, what plants you want to put in there, and you've identified your soil, I've got a little teeny list here of some of the things you might consider. In semi-shade, I call them shady characters, there's patchouli, parsley, mint, tea hibiscus, which it likes it shady, but it likes heat, and wild garlic, wild onion. The ones that like sun would be dill, fennel, lavender, rosemary. They like sun. If you're not sure what you want to plant, always plant sage. Because they always say if you don't know what you need, when in doubt, use sage. We have those that like the soil a little drier, which would be borage, coneflower, Mexican marigold, or French tarragon. Now they like their soil, French tarragon, it likes that soil dry, but it's real persnickety. And it's really hard to grow. So if you like the flavor, but you want something that's similar in flavor, you want to switch it out, that's when that Mexican marigold comes in, or the Texas tarragon. It's got a flavor that's a little bit stronger, but it sure is good, and it can take full sun. It's not one bit bashful. You stick it right out there. And when it needs water, like most herbs, when they need water, they'll let you know they'll start to droop. The problem people have with herbs is they usually overwater. So they like moist, but there are very few that really like to sit in it. If it has the word marsh in front of it, like, marshmallow, then that's one that you say, okay, well that can take a pretty damp soil. Horsetail also takes really damp soil, so I plant mine near a gutter. So when that water comes down, I can know in the wetter the season, the better it does. Horsetail, if you haven't seen it, it looks like large green straws, and they're hollow in the middle. And it's also called shade grass because you can use it like a septic stick. If you cut yourself, you can squeeze that, and it'll stop that blood. And it'll sting, just like a septic stick, and it'll stop that blood in a New York minute. It also, they used to call it scrub brush because it has silica in it, and you can scrub your pots and pans with it. It is good for drawing out heavy metals. So if you're trying to do things that are blood purifiers, that is an excellent little herb to make tea out of. And it's one of those things you can do maybe about 12 days, kind of like golden tea. There are so many herbs that we have growing wild that we consider weeds, like dandelions. I get mullein. A lot of people don't want that growing in their yard. Wild onion. There are plantain. That's usually one a lot of people just cuss when they see plantain growing in their yard. They don't know what it is. Absolutely excellent plant. My two most favorite plants, I would say, would be the mullein and the plantain or chickweed. They form a lot of the same functions, and I call, and this won't be in any books, but I like to call the plantain a stop and go, because part of the leaves, if you have diarrhea or loose bowels, it helps to stop those up. But the little bitty seeds at the top are psyllium seeds, and that's what we use when we have Metamucil. And so that adds that bulk. It is a good pot herb, but it is excellent as a drawing salve. A friend of mine got bit by a brown recluse, and they lived out in the middle of nowhere, and it woke him up in the middle of the night. His skin was swelling and throbbing, and they didn't have anywhere that they could go right at the time because they lived so far out. His wife goes out in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning. She's got a flashlight, and she starts pulling up plantain. She mashed it up, she put it on there, and on his wound, and when they got up in the morning, you could see where that leaf had been. It was clear around there, and they were able to get him to the doctor, and later the next day. And that doctor says, I don't know what y'all did, but it sure did help, because it dries that skin. So it can pull out things like splinters. It can pull out plants. It's a drawing salve. It tightens up that skin around.
How do you make it stick to that area? Do you put bandage over it?
You can, yes ma'am, you can mash it, put a bandage over it, and that will, and sometimes I'll cover it with plastic wrap to kind of keep that moisture in. The plantain, I have a picture of it right there. See the bottom? It's that grows in, and it's ribbed on the back. Yeah, 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 it's real, yeah, and that's the part. And we have so many different varieties of that. Another thing that plantain is good with is if you have questionable or contaminated soil, both it and chickweed will draw the poisons out of that soil. Now you don't want to use those plants, of course, for any culinary medicinal use. But when you're driving along the highway and you'll see large plantains out there, big old giant leaves, and everything in your herbal body will want to grab one. But it's because what that is taking all that pollution and stuff out of the soil and all those cars that go by. And so it looks like it's, growing. Oh man, these are great healthy plants, but they're doing their job.
I have a question.
Sure.
Things like dill. When dill gets large and starts putting on those yellow blooms, is it still good to cook with? I mean, does it lose any of its potency once it flowers?
Well, any plant that flowers is going to, but not necessarily for culinary use, but anything that flowers, it starts at the roots, and I call them the lime juice, it comes up. So when it's flowering, the biggest part of its focus of its energy is in those flowers. So that means everything below those flowers is going to be less potent, but you're going to start getting dill seeds. So if you're patient, then that's going to get your dill seeds. So you can replant those, or you can use those in your pickling and everything as well. Yeah. But you're still going to get some flavor out of it because dill's pretty potent. Dill, fennel, they're pretty good. One thing about dill, once you put it where you're going to put it, leave it alone because it's grouchy. It does not like to move. And even though dill and fennel are related, they don't kind of like to be next to each other. It's just the same with lavender and rosemary. They're kin, but they don't like each other.
My rosemary did not. It came back.
I had rosemary planted next to a lavender, and my lavender lasted about 2 years, and then it just disappeared. So the rosemary competed with the lavender.
Why I don't know why they don't like each other, or they must have had a bad Thanksgiving together or something. I don't, that's one of those things for, that's a Debbie question, that's when I was like, Debbie, answer that one. But they just don't. And the other thing about lavender is you need to plant it apart. Lavender, and it may be lavender's attitude, it likes to feel a little more superior than all the other plants. So whenever you see lavender planted, you see them planted in these big old berms. And when I had mine, I had a giant bucket. And lavender will peter out after a few years anyhow. And so does some of your rosemary. But I was lucky I had a rosemary plant that lasted until my mother got a hold of it, which was about 10 years.
Will the lavender reseed? Will new ones come up from those seeds in the lavender? I haven't had luck with that.
It's hard. It's hard to get it to grow lavender from seed. I remember Debbie telling me that all the time. So it's best to just get new plants, or you can divide off of the plants you have. So you can, take some off of that and then replant it. That's going to be your best bet. But growing lavender from seed is kind of like getting that camel through an eye of a needle. It's just not going to happen. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Because this is going to be I do questions and answers, and I'm much better at that. Do you have any questions about types of plants, or what what different herbal functions are? If not, well then we'll have you look up here. This is our display board. And a lot of the things that you might not think about as being useful herbs would be things like dandelion. Dandelion is hugely useful. Instead of yanking it out of your ground and tossing it, it is in the springtime, because that's when it pops up. It is a springtime herb. It is wonderful for purifying the blood, and all parts of the dandelion are useful. The roots, dandelion is akin to chicory, and you can toast those roots. And back during the Civil War, they used to use that as coffee substitutes. So that was a big pastime, was finding substitutes for coffee and tobacco. In the South, they wanted substitutes for coffee, and in the North, they wanted substitutes for tobacco. And chicory and dandelion filled the bill. We made a dandelion infused oil. It's really great for skin care. So it's a really nice skin care. It is mild if you to treat constipation. So if you have a little bit of chronic constipation, you can take a little bit of that dandelion. That's good for that. Valerian, you use the root mostly, and if you've never experienced valerian root, I would say go into a 13-year-old boy's gym bag and take a whiff. Because that stuff is potent. But fortunately, it doesn't taste like it smells, and the key to taking the valerian is to mix it with something like rosemary. You'll never even know it's there. It sort of bridges that hello gap, it's kind of funky. But you can't get a better nervine, a better relaxer than valerian. The tops of it smell like shampoo, so you can't believe that anything that has hair that smells that good, like feet that smells that bad, but that's valerian. African blue basil is a really great pollinator, and so you can use it culinary, you can use it medicinally like you would other basils. Mint, the wonderful world of mint. I love mint. My favorite mint is lemon balm, and in medieval times they would say it's good for what ails you. It maketh the heart merry, and it is there isn't just about anything they can't do in any of those plants. Lemongrass, lemon balm, lemon verbena, and lemons, they carry a large amount of what's called citral, and those are excellent cancer fighters. I made a salve one time for my aunt that had some skin cancer, and it was made with the lemongrass. And it flaked off.
How do you use the lemongrass in something like a tea? Can you use it as a stir stick?
Well, you can use it as a stir stick. You can chop it up and it's your tea. You can steep it directly. So that is lemongrass tea is just that. With lemongrass, as it gets older, it gets tougher and it gets more razor sharp. So culinary use is usually the very bottom, kind of like a leaf. But when it's new and the leaves are tender, they're okay. But as it gets older, you just dry it out. I have a jar of lemongrass right here. And you just cut that sucker up and put hot water on it, let it steep, and voila, you got lemongrass in it. No, you can use it by itself. Yes, sure. Yeah, the tea police will not do it. You can blend, you can mix it. Feel free to mix your tea. Just cut loose and let it go. If it seems like a good idea at the time, give it a shot. If it's nasty, then don't drink it.
Do you just steep the
Yeah, just the best way, and that's what's so great about the Urban League is we, go through this process. But what you're going to do is when you find a plant, when you want to harvest your plant, dandelion, all of that is good, from the root to the flower. So what you'll do is you'll pull it up, unless you want to use it fresh, which you can. But you'll pull it up, you wash it off, give it a little bath, you don't have to scrub too hard, and then we usually let them dry. So it's a lot easier sometimes to handle and to save when it's dry. It gets rid of that water content, so it's going to be more potent. And then the rule of thumb is a teaspoon, a cup, and a tablespoon of quartz. So if you wanted to make you some dandelion tea, you can do it that way. The roots are thick and woody. I cut them small. Once I've dried them, if if I want to toast them, for flavor, you can do that. But your coffee grinder is going to be your best herb friend, because you put it in there and you can powder those things, and then once you use them, you steep them, whether it's in alcohol, oil, water, just throw away what you haven't used. I think my time has expired, but I appreciate y'all, and thank you for your patience.